My guest today here is Zach Conde. Zach has been volunteering in Mongolia for 2 years with the Australian volunteering program, mostly focusing on youth empowerment, sustainability areas. And today we will talk about his experience volunteering in Mongolia in the sustainability field. Also, he is a street photographer. He takes film photos, and we will also talk about that. Hi, Zach. How are you? Thank you for making time and being the guest.
Thanks for having me, Dono. I'm really excited to be in Mongolia because it's one of my favorite times of years. I get really excited for Sagansar.
Thank you. So, I'm also excited for Tanasar, especially when I'm not in Mongolia. We miss this kind of celebrations, especially with the family. And I will also celebrate the Tanasar here, thankfully. So this is my like typical traditional question for all the guests. Why did you decide to volunteer in Mongolia?
Well, to be honest, the first time I came to Mongolia to volunteer was in 2019. And I always knew when I was an undergrad and doing my master's that I wanted to do international volunteering with the Australian Volunteers Program. And when I was really ready to take the leap and do it, one of the only places that had an assignment that actually fit my sustainability background was Mongolia. And I never really thought that I would end up here. I didn't know a whole lot about it. And within a month, I was just in love with the country. Even though I came in October when everything was getting cold, it was snowing within a week of me arriving. And even then, I was still just completely sold on the place. Such an interesting mix of Asian culture with European culture, especially from my experience traveling in Eastern Europe. And so I got repatriated during COVID, and I did everything I could over the next 2 years during lockdown to make sure that I could come back to Mongolia and actually spend a significant amount of time here, learn as much as I could, and contribute as much as I possibly could.
Was Mongolia your first country you volunteered?
With the Australian Volunteers Program, it was my first country, but I had done a 2 week assignment through the Medical Missions Foundation in Romania, and I
Mhm.
was their communications officer, writing back stories from the trip to fundraisers and essentially just trying to convey as much of the actual experience on the ground as we possibly could to kind of make an emotional connection between the people in America and essentially who the final beneficiaries were.
Let's talk about the first impression of Mongolia. And as an Australian volunteer in Mongolia, have you encountered any cultural differences or challenges when you first started working and living in Mongolia?
Sure, the differences for every single day, and they still are. I still learn something new every day here. And I'm not saying negative differences either. Like the surprises every day are really positive most of the time. And I think when I first arrived, one of the things I noticed right away was that there are a lot of young people, especially in the NGO sector where I spend most of my time. And that creates such an incredibly agile work environment where people are very accepting of new ideas. People are very creative naturally in the way that they're thinking about these old problems that we're trying to solve. And also, there's a lot of women in the workforce that I like within the INGO scene. So, like for example, in my office, beside when we have a driver, he's usually the only other guy in the office, and so that also creates a different work culture because in Australia, my whole team was I was the youngest one by 25 years, and there was only one woman on our team, and she wasn't in the field like everyone else on the team was. So it that is really cool. Like I'm really interested, like getting to see how gender impacts the way that we work and the kind of solutions that we choose, especially in sustainability.
My working experience was also the same. Most of the time, it was mostly women were my colleagues and very young people. And I think it's nice for foreigners, it's the same experience. And can you share some of memorable experiences working as a volunteer? Funny story or something you learned as a surprise?
Yeah, what would be the funny one? So when I first came back from lockdown in Melbourne, Melbourne was the second most locked down city in the world. We went through, I think it was 4 or 5 different lockdowns, totaling more than a year, if I remember right. It felt like forever at the time. And coming straight out of that into Mongolia, and I'd only been here for 6 months. I'd never seen a summer before, and I came back in April 2 years ago, and really right off the plane, I think within 10 days of landing in Mongolia, I was on my first field work with our team at Caritas Czech Republic, with our youth empowerment team from the All for Youth, Youth for All project, and also traveling with the Center for Citizenship Education, one of our project partners. And I'd never met them before. I'd been volunteering remotely for a year from lockdown in Melbourne, and usually I only had like 2 coworkers at Caritas that I was working directly with in that time. And so I hadn't met any of our partners before. And my first time meeting them was them picking me up at 7 in the morning, 10 days after arriving into Mongolia. And now we're going to Bayan Hongor. And I'd never been outside of two of aimag before. And so it was my first countryside trip and really didn't know what to expect. I hadn't really seen photos of what the aimag centers look like. And on this trip, I was functioning more as a communications officer. And so trying to shoot engaging video while also like I had like a 1 hour workshop that I was running on how we engage young people through local government in Australia. And in my breaks, I would go wandering around the aimag center, just fascinated and captivated by the surroundings and just how different it feels there. Like the people are different, and the way they smile is different, the way they talk to you is different. And there was this one great shot that I got where there was this cat way up on this roof, and it was just looking down on me, and the sun was perfectly behind its head, and it was this ginger cat. And so it looked like it had this golden halo around it. And I was super stoked about this
Wow.
photo. And I go and take this back into the workshop, and some of the participants were curious to see what kind of photos I'd taken of them throughout the day. And so I was just scrolling through the pictures on the camera, showing them. And then the picture of the cat comes up, and one of the women from a community organization there was just immediately reacted like "yoy" and just like tried to swipe the picture away from my camera. And then I learned that that was my first time experiencing that countryside Mongolians often, and even countryside or Mongolians living in UB, have this stigma around cats, and specifically the cat's eyes. And the cat's eyes were like really vivid in this photo, and so it kind of freaked her out. And it was just one of those really cute
Really?
moments of cultural difference. Yeah,
Like freaked out?
she
Really?
was really
Like, I
keen to
mean,
move
like
that
a
picture off my
tadpole.
camera.
I see. Ah, I see, I see. Yes. Okay, I'm thinking about my family and my relatives, and yeah, they're not like who live in Arhanga, and they're not very fond of cats, I guess. So, can you describe what Amic Center looks like?
um, at its best, it's lush and green, and there's mountains all around. I think Bayan Hongor's center looks a little bit similar to Setzerlig in Arhangai. I think I've got that right. But
Hmm.
there's mountains everywhere. There's rivers, usually quite close, and so you step outside the community, and there's the steppe, and it is just a carpet of wildflowers, and really friendly, slow pace of life, and very welcoming. I've only had positive experiences in the Amex. On the flip side, though, during wintertime, I think one of the things that we don't really think so much about is the way that they deal with air pollution in a way that can be much more serious than the air pollution in UB. I can't prove that it's more serious because there's no air pollution monitoring in the actual Amex centers that I've been to. But you just look, and they don't have the kind of coal that we burn in UB, where it's more of this like clean coal, like washed coal.
Mm-hmm.
But in the Amex centers, it's still just raw coal. And so I was shocked when I saw there were 61. We talked to the governor about this. There were 61 of these chimneys all throughout Bayan Hongor's Amex center, all of them putting out this thick black smoke, and it's you can smell it inside every building, every place you go, and that's pretty confronting. So it's a dramatic difference between summertime countryside and then wintertime countryside, and it would be nice to see more happening, or at least more conversations around like what is it like actually to be in the countryside during winter time and being exposed to this kind of pollution, because it's not really something that we talk about so much.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. It's no longer just a UB issue. It's okay. UB is the most like vital and critical, and also aimag centers there have also their own air pollution. Wherever there is centralization, there is air pollution. I'm from Arhanga, but I grew up in Ulaanbaatar, so I mostly only travel to Arhanga, Tsitsirlik. Other than Arhanga, I have been to Hufsul Murung most of the time, just as traveling and also for work. So I was shocked, like I think it was 2 years ago, that Murung was so polluted. I went there in November, and before I had been there like 6, 7 years ago, and it was fine. And exactly most of the time, I was also traveling to Murung in the summertime. And when I went there last time in November, it was awful. The air pollution was awful. It was so bad. Yes, I think it's really important issue that also people are not talking enough.
One thing that I will say is that it was really positive. Last time we visited Bayan Hongor about 2 months ago, the local government introduced us to a plan they have to manage the air pollution for Bayan Hongor, where they're moving apartments away from the city, and they're also creating a power plant, like a centralized power plant, and they've already started building it, and they expect it to be operational in the next 5 years, which will reduce the need for all of these small chimneys throughout the city. And the power plant's actually quite far away from the city itself, so I'm really looking forward to being able to visit Bainhongor in 5 years during winter and see how different it is. So it's really like uplifting to see that things are changing.
Yes, it's great to hear. And so, with your work, other than buying hunger, have you traveled to other AMEX and other areas, other regions of Mongolia?
Yeah, so with the All for Youth, Youth for All project, we work in, well, our project closed in December last year, but previously we were working in Bayanhongor, Dorngovi, Saling, and Hinti, as well as UB. And then with our Sustainable Plastic Recycling in Mongolia project, we're working in UB and Erdenet and Hishigundur Sum in Bulgan. And with our Switching on the Green Economy eco-labeling project, we're working in Ulaanbaatar and in Bulgan.
Hmm. What is your favorite place to go outside of UB?
Oh, that's a challenging one because I have no idea why, but I just have this fixation with the Gobi. There's something really magic about the colors of the landscape, the contrast between the yellow sand and the really kind of beautiful, it's kind of like a maroon colored rock that's scattered throughout the Gobi region in Dorngo. And but then on the flip side of that, I also really have a soft spot for Saling, between the rivers, the forests, the mountains. I mean, it just really has a little bit of everything there, and their food in Saling is unreal. So
Hmm,
yeah, I'm stuck between the north and the south.
nice. I feel a bit ashamed because I haven't been to Gobi. Like, I have just been to, energy center through it was with a road trip, but I haven't really traveled in Gobi and like stayed and felt all those things, and also neither to Sidling. So there's so many places I also haven't visited yet. So I will
What,
visit one day.
what would you say your favorite amig is?
Of course, Arhanga is very nice, and 2 years ago I traveled to Alte Tauenbocht to Bayangulli, and it was a road trip with my colleagues, and it was so much full of adventure, and it was beautiful. So on our way, I realized that Zahwang is so nice. It's so beautiful. The nature is so beautiful, and of course, and I love Hufsul. The north northern part of Hufsul is so beautiful also. And it's not traveled much, and also the of course the roads are quite rough, but the scenery and the everything, the mountains, and in the winter the snow, and it's so beautiful.
Wow, I'm gonna have to find my way that direction.
Yes, you should. How do you see the current state of sustainability practices in Mongolia and in UB, and what are the specific initiatives have you been involved in to promote environmental consciousness?
So I'm actually really optimistic about sustainability in Mongolia because when I first came here in 2019, when I was working with the Asia Foundation, we would be searching for information about uh, like organic waste. We're working on an organic waste pilot project, trying to figure out different scales of recycling organic waste through composting on site. So we're working with restaurants, with elementary schools and households, small businesses, trying to figure out how does composting actually work in practice in Mongolia. And part of that was also trying to figure out when we have composters that are using electricity, for example, like when we're working at a restaurant where it's not really an option to have a non-electric version of a composter. There's not going to be someone who's available to turn it over and keep the food um, aerated so that there's lots of oxygen feeding all these little microorganisms that are munching on all the food waste. So I was trying to do greenhouse gas accounting to figure out, is the electricity we're using to power this machine actually emitting more carbon than we are saving by recycling this
Mm.
food waste? So, are we doing more harm than good by using electricity to power this process? And what I found was it was actually really challenging to find how much 1 kilowatt of energy in UB actually emits. But what I'm seeing now is that a lot of these information gaps that empower informed choices about sustainability are getting filled. We have much more of a full picture of what we need to do to actually solve some of the really urgent sustainability issues in Mongolia. We have really actionable steps to take those actions. So that's what I'm seeing now. We're empowered with the information. Those gaps have been filled very quickly, and so now it's just a matter of actually making it happen and also communicating that information to people, because a lot of that information is buried in technical reports, buried in international organization reports, and so I am starting to see some organizations that are more acting as that between the technical side and translating that research into something that, for example, a young person is actually interested in reading, sharing it in a way that they like to be communicated with, like with posters on Instagram, short, entertaining reels. So I think that we're seeing a really interesting transition in sustainability right now, and I think you'll see the sustainability field look very different in the next 5 to 10 years in Mongolia as green climate funding starts to trickle down to local organizations. And as we start to see these research recommendations actually manifesting into the actual real world environment. As far as the sustainability initiatives I've worked on, the first one was um, the Waste and Climate Change project with the Asia Foundation, where I was supporting the team there to try and figure out what are the best options for composting in negative 40 degrees, because that is the core challenge of composting here.
Mm.
And so I was doing technical analysis there, trying to figure out which machinery would work the best here. And what we found was that worm farms are actually the way to go. Worm farms in schools, and little kids just are fascinated by it. They love feeding them. They love putting their banana peels into the actual like worm enclosure. They paint it. They make it their own. So that was a really interesting lever for us, was to figure out that like young people are super interested in this content if they get exposed to it. As
Mhm.
far as what I'm doing now with Caritas Czech Republic in Mongolia, the team that I'm working with, we are working to try and support plastic recycling companies to deliver products to the public that the public are interested in buying and they understand the reason why they should be buying a recycled product instead of a new one. Because if you've never heard about this before, perhaps you might think that the recycled product may not be as good, it may not last as long, it might be less quality than the actual brand new product. And so, talking to them about working with the plastic recycling companies to figure out what problems and barriers they run into in their day-to-day business, and how can we as a team work together to try and solve some of those barriers, like introducing them to banks who have green loan products, working with university researchers to develop new prototype products that then we would create an open copyright to, so that any recycling business that wants to create this product can. And so we figured that out by doing a lot of market research to figure out what kind of products could actually be made in Mongolia from this material that would actually be successful in the market. And we, with the Switching on the Green Economy project, we're working with several different other local organizations as well as people in need,
Mm.
and Sustainable Finance Association. They go by TOS, and we're working with them to try and essentially pilot the very first eco label in Mongolia, so that businesses that are taking steps towards circular economic processes in their business can actually qualify for this label after an independent audit. And then those businesses have a financial incentive to actually do these things, because often sustainability costs businesses money. You have to change the way you're doing things. It might take a little bit longer. And so having a financial incentive is really important for the businesses to actually go on this transition journey. And we think the eco label is a really um, yeah, we think it's a really solid option, and we've been working with lots of different businesses already. And right now, we're preparing for some really exciting activities in the coming year, where we actually get to work with thousands of these small and medium-sized agri-food businesses to
Mm.
introduce the eco label idea to them, and essentially support a mentorship program to help them figure out their own individual business model and how that can be more sustainable.
Yes, that sounds quite exciting and interesting. And also, that composting project sounds very interesting. Have you met people who individually compost at their home? Because I think it's, as you said, it's quite challenging, because it's even a struggle to just recycle my waste at home, because for most part of the for of Ulaanbaatar, we don't have this infrastructure to collect our recycle. And for example, what I do at home is I collect my waste, the plastic bottle, cans, and bottles and paper waste on my balcony in boxes, and I collect them for like 3 4 months. Then when it's filled and full, I call the NGO to pick them up, and I pay money to pick them up. I call Tsartsa Norong, and so it goes like that. And it's same for my friends too. So there, as you said, young people are very willing to be more sustainable and recycle their waste and compost at home, but there are struggles this. Yeah, as you said, there will be change. I'm also very optimistic about that. At least I would want to be able to recycle my waste. Then I will also think about composting. And I know for some of my friends, even though they want to recycle, their parents are not very understanding, and they don't want to hoard all this waste in their space.
Sure, I totally understand that. It is really challenging. But for any of those sustainability champions who actually do want to take this effort, there is an excellent guide that the Sustainable Plastic Recycling in Mongolia project created. So if you Google Caritas Czech Republic Mongolia resources, on our resources page on our website, there is a home waste sorting guide. And the best thing about this guide is it actually has a list of maybe 50 or 60 different NGOs and small businesses that will come to your home district by district and actually collect your recycling if you do like store it until they come. And as far as composting at home goes, that in particular is pretty challenging. And I haven't met anyone who has done that. But one really notable example that I did see was Hustai National Park, where you can see the tahi. They actually were already coming up with their own solutions to their food waste problem. And they would essentially dig this big hole at the beginning of summertime. And then as tourist groups would pass through and leave food waste, then they would put all the food waste into the hole. And then at the end of the summer season, then they would bury it. And it's not the most perfect composting solution because an ideal situation, you'd be turning it over so that oxygen can get in there. If you don't have oxygen in the composting environment, you're actually doing something called anaerobic composting. And that's the thing that happens when you take food waste to a landfill. And that's the main problem. That's where you start to get methane, which is actually much stronger than carbon dioxide being emitted. And so Hustai was actually doing something pretty cool. So if they just turned over their food waste a little bit, and we talked with them about how they can make their system a little bit more effective, um, they'd already come up with their own solutions. So we do see people thinking about it, and it's nice to see it happening at like the scale of a national park camp because that's actually quite a lot of food waste we're talking about.
Hmm. And also, thanks for sharing that. We can go on to the Czech Caritas Mongolia and get that information, because I imagine that also foreigners and expats living in Mongolia also could be struggling with recycling their waste. So this kind of information is not very exposed. Thanks for sharing that. Based on your experience, how do you think Mongolians are receptive to adapting sustainable lifestyle and mindset? What are the things, do you think, challenges in fostering this mindset?
I think when it comes to recycling, it's something that people are extremely receptive to. I think the core problem is what you were hinting at before, where there are many options around, but there this information just doesn't really get shared. It's not so accessible, and so we just feel frozen. We don't really know what to do, but we're all motivated. We can all see the problem around us. And so when we are working with the public and sharing this information, we do see that they are really enthusiastic, especially young people. And whenever we hold like large public events, we'll bring the recycling bins and we'll create an announcement saying, like, you can recycle PET bottles with us this time or glass. And we do see lots of people come to the events with really big bags of waste. So people are used to sorting. They are ready for a recycling scheme at the city level. They just, yeah, there's this disconnect between the recycling companies and the public often. And one thing that we do see as a nice opportunity is a lot of businesses are starting to come on board with recycling and giving people the option of taking their recycling from their home and storing it at the office, and then the office driver or the office driver will then take it to the recycling facility, or another option is the facility comes to you, like the NGO that you were talking about before. I think that's a better system, honestly, than storing it on your balcony. If the balcony is the only option, then for sure go for it. But you get a better economy of scale when it's every employee doing it. And then you're also convincing new people who may not be thinking about this stuff to also contribute because they see their coworkers doing this. It's good modeling behavior. And so that's one thing I have noticed is more businesses are coming online, and um, that's a really nice thing to see happening. People are more interested in sustainability just for their marketing purposes, which that's fine. Whatever gets people interested in sustainability. As far as like challenges go, um, I think it is challenging to say to people you should be sorting your waste at home and then going to all this extra effort. It is a little bit more difficult to motivate people to continue doing that if it's really challenging, if their balcony is filling up with bottles, or if the office hasn't figured out a way to actually get it from the office to the recycling plant, which again, If we look at the Caritas Czech Republic Mongolia resources page, there's also a guide specifically for workplaces and offices if they want to get involved in this movement and figure out how they can solve these problems very easily. Um, I will say one funny thing. I was talking with someone from Adra. They were doing a composting project in the countryside
Hmm.
maybe 8 to 10 years ago. And one of their previous project officers was talking to me about what it was like talking to people about recycling food waste there. And it was so priceless. There was one guy who had food waste in his hasha, and the officer was explaining to him why you should be composting food waste. And he's like, look, you can get free fertilizer and then you can grow your own tomatoes and cabbages. It's a win-win solution for you. And the guy was just like looking at him. It's like, cabbages? I am not a cow. It just did not occur to him that he could grow his own vegetables. He didn't really see what the point of doing that was, which was just really funny to me.
Hmm. Um, I also observed that there is like an information gap or education gap between rural and urban people because most of the time UB people are like condemning people who migrated from rural areas that for being uncultured, they're making UB ugly, expanding this gear district. So I think on the information on sustainability and contemporary education and information on climate change and things like that, this information is also not very accessible to the rural people. And knowing that actually the very essence of the nomadic lifestyle is sustainability. And I believe the concept of waste doesn't exist in nomadic lifestyle because everything is reused, repurposed for other things. And but I also realized that I was traveling from Arhangai to Ulaanbaatar and I saw that my uncle just threw his water bottle through the window, just like nothing. And I was like shocked and you should not do this. And then I realized that there is information gap and education gap on sustainability ideas. And for the rural people we call Hutoni Humus, they have traditional ideas and culture, embedded culture about respecting nature and not doing harmful things to the nature. But it seems like there is a kind of disconnection. So, what do you think on this?
I guess I've seen the same kind of behaviors in Australia and any place that I've traveled to. So I don't think that this is a uniquely countryside Mongolian problem. And I think at the very core, it's maybe not so much about information, but it's connecting that behavior with harming something that's really precious to you. I think it's about instilling empathy between this place that you clearly love. Like when people are traveling and camping in Australia, if they leave a bunch of trash behind, they may not feel like that's such a big deal because, someone will probably clean it up, or they essentially just pass the problem on to somebody else. But I think just connecting that to, you came here because this is a special, beautiful place, and trying to figure out a way to connect that special, beautiful place with the harmful action that they've done. So I think as far as the lack of information about climate change, to be honest, I haven't noticed a huge difference in that between countryside Mongolia and UB. So last year we were actually visiting high schools and primary schools, trying to kind of get an understanding of what kind of climate change content is taught and why are kids getting interested in recycling. We do see high schools often have recycling bins that are sorted correctly, and we see worm farms being really successful, and also sorted food waste is sorted properly in the worm farms. So we're seeing these sustainable actions. But what was really interesting to me is that the connection with climate change is almost never there. So when we talked with, off the top of my head, I think it was about 60 or 70 high school children, and about 40 primary school children about, well, have you ever heard of climate change? Have you ever heard of global warming? We tried a few different terms to see if this is something that has ever appeared on their radar before. And when it comes to the high school kids, the only way that they actually find information about climate change is by accident when they're scrolling on social
Mm,
media. And there are units that are taught at school about this, but it's primarily only in geography class and chemistry. And I think that from talking with the kids there, the content that they're learning doesn't actually connect with the impacts on their daily life, on the herders' traditional way of life. They're learning about the core processes. Carbon dioxide goes in the atmosphere and warms the planet, but then what? Or also, the other component that was missing is, how did we get here? Like, they're only learning about, at least the students that we talked to, that was what we heard. What they're learning about is purely about the equation of burning more gas ends up creating more carbon dioxide, heating the planet, and kind of end of story. It wasn't really taught in a way in these classes specifically that they could connect this to something that matters to them. There was essentially a mismatch between this really important information and how does this fit into my life, my worldview, my behaviors? Am I contributing to this problem? That whole side of it wasn't really understood by the kids that we talked to, but they're very eager to learn. So that's what's really amazing about these social media accounts that are coming online now from NGOs, like local NGOs, that are taking this really complex information and then creating really engaging content on Instagram and TikTok, specifically for this generation who is just hungry for this kind of knowledge.
yeah, that's very important insight. So now let's talk about photography. I actually met you when I looking for someone to develop my color film, and I'm actually still very new to film photography. I think it's been almost 2 years, but I take photos so slowly. Like I take just maybe 2 rolls, 3 rolls a year, and I developed them after 6 months. So, how long have you been taking street photography?
Sure. So I started film photography about 10 years ago. I had like a 3 year gap, but the first time I held a film camera, I was 17, working in a dark room in high school. There's just
Cool.
some special kind of magic
Hmm.
about watching your, like, this image that you spent all this time creating, you've done all the processing, and then holding that A4 sheet of photographic paper and just being in the dark room with that dim red light, and then just slowly, like out of thin air, watching your image come out of that paper. I was just instantly hooked. So yeah, it's been a long journey. It's been more than 10 years.
Wow. In Mongolia, I think now 17 film lab is like developing color films. But that time, year and a half ago, there was no one to develop color film. And I was looking through the Facebook group, and you were posting there, and you develop your films at home, right? So, how is your experience taking photos in Mongolia, and what is your favorite spots and favorite shots? And I actually saw that your double exposures on the Ankara street, and those shots were so cool.
Hey, I appreciate it. That's the really tricky thing with film photography, especially on double exposures, is it is so difficult to actually figure out if you've nailed it or if you've overexposed it or underexposed. So that's actually how I got into digital photography, was trying things and trying different settings on the digital camera just so I could get a film shot that would actually be properly exposed when I'm doing kind of weird stuff like long exposures or double exposures. As far as like what it's like doing street photography in Mongolia, there's some really unique elements that I haven't experienced anywhere else in the world, where people will just come up to me and tap me on the shoulder and ask me to take their portrait. And
Well,
that's a really special thing because I'm kind of a shy street photographer. I'm only now getting used to actually approaching people and asking if I can take their portrait. And I try and kind of be hidden usually when I'm doing street photography and just blend in and just catch things naturally as they're happening. And it's just really cool. You'll just be at Narantul. That is one of my top favorite places in all of UB, especially for shooting film. And I'll just have a mom or like a dad and his kid like asked to do a portrait together. And
Wow.
the thing that really astonishes me is that they almost never ask for a copy. And I even have like a whole process to handle this situation if they do ask for a copy, because it's difficult to explain that it's a film photo. So I have like a little photography card that has my email address, and then they'll contact me, and then I have their name, what scene it was, where it was, and I can send them the copy. But most of the time they don't even care, and I still don't understand why they do it, like what they get out of it, just having some random person take their portrait. But it's a really cool human experience that I love. And there was one really funny time in Ulaanbaatar, Saling, where I was there for Nodum last year, and there was this uh, guy who was really enjoying his aimag that day, and he asked me to take his portrait. And so I line it up, I get this great portrait, and then he's just like, okay, show me. And like he speaks Mongolian, and my Mongolian's not so great, and so I could kind of understand from his body language what he wanted. And so I show him the camera, and there's like a little window on the back of my camera that shows you the film roll. And
Mm-hmm.
this guy's probably like 55, so he's definitely seen film rolls before, and didn't didn't get. He just asked again for his picture, and so I had a film roll in my pocket, and I take it out and I show him like, this is film. Like I can't show you your picture right now, and using Google Translate to say that. And then he's just like not happy with the answer, and then he goes and finds two young people to have me explain it to them, and then they translate to Mongolian to him. And he's just like still not happy with the answer, and he's like, at my house I have a printer, I will drive you to my home and we can print it. And I just again just I ask him like, do you have Facebook, can you give me your email address, like I will do I'm really determined to get this picture to you, but I don't know how to do it. And no email address, no Facebook, no digital presence at all. So I have this guy's photo. Ulaanbaatar is not the biggest place in the world, so maybe one day I will get the chance to give him his portrait. But
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
even saw him the next day, and again he asked me like, "Where's my
Really?
photo?"
Then I think one day you will meet him again, give him his photo.
It'll be meant to be.
Yes, yes, exactly. And people asking for their portrait to be taken. That's very new for me to hear because I'm not very familiar how the like street photography process really goes in real life. And I also believe actually approaching to the people and asking for it is the like most difficult part. And actually that's very interesting to hear. Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, I still don't get it, but it's great.
And are you still developing your films at home? And how do you manage that? You said that you order the chemicals from Australia and then you do it at home, right?
Yeah, the first time I got the chemicals, a Mongolian photographer helped me order them from the US. But I still, as a foreigner, that's one thing that's quite challenging is getting mail here. And so I don't really like bothering people with these kind of like mundane problems. And so whenever I travel back to Australia, or if I'm in Korea, then that rarely happens. But if it does happen, then I'll buy lots of the powdered chemical and then take it back in my suitcase. It's safe to fly. The airlines are okay with it. So yeah, I'll essentially buy as much of the powder as I can, because the powder can last for years. And it's just as soon as I mix it, then I have this 6-month ticking expiry date before I can't use it anymore. And so yeah, the chemicals were really difficult to find. I haven't found a local source for them. But at the same time, it's great that 17 Film Lab does color work now, because
Mm.
for years when I was living here, there wasn't anyone who would do it. And that's the whole reason I set up the home lab. And so, yeah, I mean, developing, once you have the chemicals, everything else is really easy, actually. Like, my dark room is literally my bathroom with duct tape all around it. And the funniest thing was when we were setting up the dark room originally and figuring out whether the showering room or the bathroom was darker, my friend, also a film photographer, was like going back and forth between the rooms with the lights off and trying to see which one they thought was darkest. And then when they shut the shower door, they kept on like opening and trying to get it to open, and nothing would happen. And I tried to open it from the outside, and it wouldn't work. The door handle had literally just broken as they walked in there. And then I realized, like, oh, the light is actually still off. They're just sitting there in the dark. And so I quickly like flip on the light, and then I'm just like thinking, like, how am I actually going to get them out of there? Because the screws on the door handle are on their side, so I can't unscrew the door handle and actually like get them out. So we tried like breaking the door handle with a hammer for ages. That didn't work. And so finally we resorted to actually like taking a hammer with a nail and popping out the pins that hold the hinges together so we could take the whole door off of the wall. And
Wow.
they were essentially stuck in there for like 30 or 40 minutes. And just ridiculous. What are the chances of that?
And when I see you like posting and commenting on Facebook group, I think you're now quite into the Mongolian photographers community. What would you say about Mongolian photographers community?
Their style is amazing. Like, one thing that I really enjoy is getting, like, there was this really amazing street art exhibit, or not street art, but street photography exhibit that happened at the National Gallery. I think it was in November or December. And almost every one of my friends was exhibited there. And seeing the way that they view the city around us and the countryside around us, compared, like, a lot of us were taking pictures of the same things, but in really different ways, like even the same buildings, but just the eye of the photographer changes person to person. And then sometimes it's the exact same. And that's a really cool moment too, to just have that really like personal connection with someone, because you put a lot of work into actually doing film photography, because it does take so much time and you have to really love it to actually commit to it. And then to just see that someone else saw that exact same thing you did and captured it in the same way, like, you almost feel like we think in a really similar way for that to be possible. So there's some photographers that I really admire here. Like, there's a street photography club that's recently started publishing a lot of work. I can't remember their name off the top of my head, but I think it's Bat Orgil is probably my favorite street artist here. Like, I think his eye is astounding. Like, the things he captures, the way he captures it, and the style of film he's using, because it's not just a 35 millimeter. He also shoots medium format, which is always something I've been curious to try, but those cameras are so heavy to travel with, so I've never actually had one. But yeah, I really like his work, and especially Davanyan, the owner of 17 Film Lab. I really respect the way he approaches photography.
Yes, when I went to 17 Film Lab and asked for developing my film, and he's so passionate about photography, and he teaches people how to develop their film by themselves, and I can see that he's doing everything for the love of just taking photography, and so passionate about it. I love that.
I know, right? I really don't think that the film photography community would be anything like it is without him continuing to teach new people how to do it and getting them passionate, and also supplying film, because there have been times where I've been here where there's no film at all in the country. And 17 Film Lab, since they've started stocking film, they're the only ones who really seem to have it like regularly all year.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zach. It was so much fun to talk about sustainability and also photography. I actually learned a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for hosting me, and I'm wishing you all the best on your PhD. It's so exciting. It's such an amazing step you're taking.
Thank you for listening to this podcast, and if you'd like to keep up with Mongolia, make sure you subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and everywhere else. Хавд байсанд маш их баярлалаа. Баяртай.